We haven't done this, Jen, since you and I doing this since like the 6x6.
Oh yeah, so much walking around.
You should do a start on the remote. But that's not how technology works anymore.
Yeah.
Turn on the TV.
Press play.
That DVD.
Since we premiered Yellow Peril in 2019, a lot of the world has changed. I mean, obviously we had this incredible global pandemic, and also just a lot of spotlight on civil rights movements, the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of stuff about anti-Asian hate and racism, just like pretty big collective shifts. While things were still really closed down, I was part of an art circle. It ended up like it didn't really go anywhere, but one of the topics of conversation became about content in performance and what audiences need coming out of like such a traumatic period. And there were a couple people that were really like firm that very emotional and like very trauma-focused performance needed to take a bit of a back seat because of how we need to center joy. And at the time, I was sort of like, that's ridiculous. I don't think so. I think it's important to like really like put things front-facing and like talk about them. And I still believe that. But I think that like somewhere along the way, I've actually moved more towards that. I used to think that if I was to, you know, do silly numbers or have humor or do things that were joyful, it was sort of like a betrayal of this value that I set forth for myself as an artist, which was to like very seriously examine like hurt. And I realized that that's also like very taxing on myself, like on my mind and my body, and like constantly opening up these wounds is a lot. And it's okay for me to just do a piece that is centered around joy, because that is also a part of my experience, and that is also a part of an experience that I want other people to have. So that's been a big thing. Yeah, it turns out I'm really funny. So I've incorporated a lot of humor into my performance. You can't ignore also like the economic situation, where in terms of like a transaction of performance, most times if I go out and do like a ballad that is addressing anti-Asian racism, I will feel very good about it. But in terms of like how I'm being monetarily like compensated and consumed, I will get tipped less than someone who goes out and does like a pop song that's top 40 and does a dip and, you know, most of the time. And so there's like that part of it as well. Like I have to pay bills. And so sometimes it's just like, well, I'm not only gonna go out there and make myself feel horrible and re-traumatize myself, but I also can't afford to like take a cab home.
Right.
So yeah, it's frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
For myself, I've gone through a lot of changes. I stepped into my trans femininity, which has been a very wonderful experience. I started medically transitioning, which you don't need to do that in order to identify as trans, but for me it has been like a pretty big part of my journey. Yeah, it's interesting enough is that like through the journey of stepping into my trans femininity, pronouns have mattered less and less to me. Not to say that it's not an important issue for folks, because it is, but I had an experience where I was in a liquor store and I was misgendered or like gendered differently by 3 different people in the span of like 10 minutes or probably less. And it was like in that moment, I like walked out of the situation, I was like, this is literally not about me. Like it's whatever these people are comfortable with when they look at me and what that means, like what my body is supposedly means to them. It was a very releasing thing, because I stepped out of that and I was like, I don't care anymore, you know? And obviously if I was in a situation where someone was like intentionally trying to like hurt my feelings or be violent towards me by doing that, that's a different story. But yeah, it's just something that I think, I'm like, I know who I am, or I'm more acquainted with who I am, and I'm comfortable with that changing, and that's for me, and I repel that.
We inherit the ritual. Mother's hands slip over our fingers, guide us through rivers of rice, to stir impurities that swirl from grain, roil through water, and tip into sinks. We learn to agitate, to remove what judgment clouds our character, to resist what prejudice muddies our presence, to lift what corruption shields our excellence. We rinse 3 times and ready the pot. We boil for our ancestors. In every grain, the resilience of the individual. In every bowl, the fabric of community. In every belly, the nourishment of life.
So just about, I guess now it would be like a year, almost just over a year. The anniversary was like a couple of weeks ago, but there was a shooting in Atlanta, and a white man in Atlanta went around to, I think it was a number of massage parlors, and murdered 7 people. Most of them were of Asian descent. The majority of those were Korean women in these massage parlors. And yeah, it was a really heavy thing, I think, because not only as an Asian person and knowing the type of violence that is enacted on a body that looks like mine or looks like yours, but there's also like a gendered element to that. I did a number that was in dedication to the people who were murdered, to a song. It's a cover of I Will Survive, covered by Anoni, and it's a heart-wrenching rendition of the song. And I used projections and had some dedications to them. And I think for me, for the focus of the number was like, I really just wanted this twofold thing where I want to dedicate this number to these women who were murdered, but also to members of our community who experience this type of racism. And then I ended the number with some statements about, you know, we are not a fetish, we are not a virus, we're not a joke, we're human. And that was directed at every other member of the audience that would be watching, because acknowledging that I want this to be for my community, but I know that we're also being watched all the time. So there has to be like that direct shift. Yeah, so I think my intention behind that was to just sort of like make most of the number like, this is for us, but also I can see you watching, and so I need you to know this is how we feel, yeah. Just thinking about the film, at the end of the film, I talk about the distinctions between Maiden China and Kendell Yan, and I think watching it now, I realize like that distinction has closed, or it's become less, like in the distinction of like, I say that Kendell feels less confident and has like a lot of these like self-doubts and worries, and you know, obviously that's just like a part of my trauma, and so I have that, but it's become less. I've like stepped into myself in a lot more of a confident way. And so I think she would just be very proud and feel accomplished, because I think that when I'm in drag, that's like the feeling that I also want other people to experience. And I want other people to see themselves in what I'm doing, and specifically other queer Asian people to witness how strong vulnerability can be, and to see how beautiful your culture is, and that it has a space anywhere you go, because you have a space anywhere you go, right? Yeah, I think she'd be like, fuck yeah. I don't think that's gonna make it in. I think she'd be like, rock on. She'd be very proud.